Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. I thought I'd record this video on this year's DPSI roleplay topics for the CIoL exam because the topics have just been published yesterday. I've had a quick look at them and I'd like to do a first kind of impressions video. It's not really going to be a deep dive into all the terminology and everything that could come up, but rather an initial impressions video, to give you some pointers and some help on the kind of things that I think could come up, on the kind of things that you might want to look into. The topics are not always that obvious, or students don't always look at them, read them, or look at them carefully enough. So it's really that kind of video to give those kind of pointers to help in a preparation if you're sitting the exam this year. So without further ado, let me share my screen with you so we can have a look at these topics. So here we are. These are the topics for June 2023, for the June 2023 exam. So let's look at so we're going to take them in turn. So as you know, this year for the law option, there's a unified law pathway. So there's no longer an English law and a Scottish law pathway. So from now on, both options have been merged into a non-specific legal option, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I would like to, but before that, I would like to look at the health pathway topics, and this is them here. Make sure you can see my screen. So for the first, so there's two scenarios. So remember, that's the format of the DPSI exam changed last year, and Unit 1 is now composed of two parts. It was already composed of two parts, but basically now the first part is just consecutive roleplay. So there's no simultaneous interpreting in the first scenario, and the second scenario is only simultaneous. So this is the first thing you might want to consider when looking at these topics. Remember that the first scenario is just going to be consecutive, and the second scenario is going to be simultaneous. So you might want to think about how about the kind of text that you could get as a result of that. And also the kind of preparation that you might want to do. So for example, you might want to practice a lot more simultaneous interpreting on the second scenario than on the first one, obviously, because that's what you're going to get. So first scenario, patient and GP discuss the DNA CPR. Do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation order due to a patient's worsening COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease symptoms. GP explains the DNA CPR order, and the patient asks questions about controlling symptoms, life expectancy, and care plan. Yeah, you might, this is just an aside, but you might notice that some of the English in these is maybe not perfect. But that's by the by. It shouldn't really be the case in an exam of this nature. But anyway, I'm not going to go into that. Okay, so when looking at this topic, most people go, okay, great. Do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Great, that's what I'm going to look at. Yeah, well, okay, yeah, the topic does mention that, but he also mentions COPD. So obviously that's something you might want to look at, in a lot of detail. And it mentions specifically symptoms. Now, you might remember from some of my other videos on kind of things to watch out for, and things and kind of recurring themes that come up in the exam. Symptoms, diagnostic exams, treatments. These are kind of common topics that always come up in every unit, and especially symptoms is something that comes up over and over and over again for obvious reasons. So when researching COPD, don't just look at causes, don't just look at treatments, look at symptoms as well, because obviously they're giving you a very kind of powerful hint, not a hint, like an indication that that's going to come up. Okay. Also, don't just look at COPD, but look at other related conditions, other respiratory conditions that could contribute to COPD, for example, and other complications that could come up as a result of COPD. Also, because the second half, there's a second half to the role play. The GP explains the DNA CPR order, and the patient asks questions about controlling symptoms, life expectancy, and care plan. So once again, they then talk about the care plan. So in other words, the kind of treatments kind of topic, a theme, I suppose, that I was telling you about. In this case, is mostly kind of about symptom management and making the patient feel comfortable and so on. So, medications, treatments, and so on. So that's the kind of things you may want to look at. Now, in my opinion, this particular one is fairly obvious, fairly straightforward. So unless they throw a big curveball out of the blue and introduce things out of the blue, which we will never know. We never know until the exam, until the day of the exam. Then you should be okay. And remember as well that COPD, if I remember correctly, is a topic that has come up before in the exam. So you might want to look at those specific past papers. And if you don't have them, you can message me. I'll see if I can dig them out for you if I've got time. Second topic, second scenario. Patient and specialist nurse discuss a new diagnosis of diabetes. The patient raises concerns about lifestyle adjustments, and the nurse provides information about blood glucose checks, including subcutaneous insulin and district nurse's involvement. Okay, so the CIoL love diabetes. They love diabetes. Diabetes is one of those themes that keeps coming up over and over and over again, year after year. So if you're doing any DPSI preparation course, I would expect that this is one of the topics you should have covered in your course. It's not. It can be a complicated topic, but it's not necessarily a complicated topic per se. Generally speaking, it's a ubiquitous condition. It's quite common. So it's the kind of thing that you do encounter a lot in real life. So it does make sense that it should come up in the exam quite often. Actually, I do agree with that, and with the fact that it comes up quite often. That's one of the things I do agree with regarding the CIoL DPSI. Once again, now. The first sentence is not very obvious, but for clarity, my reading of it is that this is a new diagnosis. I think that's what they mean when they say, well, it says a new diagnosis. What I mean is someone who's been diagnosed for the first time with diabetes. Okay, so that's the way I would interpret it, if that matters for your preparation, and that makes sense from the context of the rest of what we told. Lifestyle adjustments, so they'll be talking about food probably, taking exercise, being more mobile, that kind of thing. So you might want to look at that kind of terminology, because that's the kind of things that sometimes trips people up. You study the medical terms and you forget to look at the kind of more common terms, day-to-day things. Also, blood glucose checks. So you might want to look at there's different ways these days, there's different ways to measure blood glucose levels, depending on the patient, depending on the diabetes, depending on the condition. So you might want to look at these. And the institutes, they do have a tendency to look at the kind of more obscure ones and kind of sneak them in there, especially if you've been told, as in this case, that they're going to, that's one of the things that's going to come up in the exam. Using subcutaneous insulin, so probably type 1 diabetes, I would imagine, if you're talking about insulin, and district nurses' involvement. Yeah, what kind of supports they would get, from the NHS and so on. It's a bit odd that they're talking about district nurses, but anyway, one thing you might want to look at for as well is, looking specifically at different types of nurses. This is one of the things that can be quite difficult for, or creates a lot of confusion when people in students. What's the difference between a health visitor, a district nurse, a sister, a staff nurse? All those kind of things, all those specific terms that have got very specific meanings. I'm not going to go into that in this video. I do have other videos where we talk about, non-equivalence, so you can check in my channel. There's I think might have one specific video on non-equivalence if I remember correctly, um, and um, yeah, so you might want to check that video for tips on how to do that. In this case, I would say, well, it's probably something you can do a direct translation. Um, as long as it conveys an accurate meaning. So yeah, that's it. One thing I would like to do as well, I might like to take this opportunity to plug my books. I've got some DPSI preparation books. Um, uh, which you can find on my website. I'll put and on Amazon. They're actually sold on Amazon. So I'll put a little link on the description below, so you can click on the link if you're interested in purchasing them. If you want to buy them directly from me, you can send me a personal message, and I've got a few copies. I can sell them, maybe a little bit cheaper than Amazon. You've got one-off role plays. You've got a book with exercises, just to kind of help you memorize and acquire some of that terminology. The exercises, sorry, this is Scottish law, but there's one on, health. So there's one on health role plays and health exercises. The exercises one does have quite a few exercises on diabetes, symptoms, medical specialties, that kind of thing. So you might find that quite useful in preparing for these specific topics. So if you are interested, let me know. Or you can buy them on Amazon. And thank you for your support. That's one way to support this channel. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the law option. So the law pathway exam, as usual, is sat over 2 days. This year, 2 days. Some years it's sat over 3 days. Um, so um, so the first thing, and it should be obvious, but this is one question that does come up quite frequently. If your exam is on the Wednesday, you only need to prepare the Wednesday topics. You can ignore the Thursday topics. Yeah. If your exam is on a Thursday, same thing applies. You can ignore the Wednesday topics and just study the Thursday topics. So because the Thursday will be the ones that apply to you. Okay. So if your exam is on the Wednesday, the first scenario, once again, the first scenario is consecutive interpreting. Second scenario is simultaneous interpreting. First scenario, a person who is suspected of committing a sexual assault is being provided with advice from their solicitor prior to being interviewed by the police at the police station. Great. So once again, most people look at this topic and say, okay, sexual assault. I'm going to read about rape and whatnot. Yeah, which is fine. Great, because that's important for preparing this topic. Different types of sexual assault, what constitutes a sexual assault in law, and so on. But it also mentions being interviewed at the police station. So and remember that the scenario is telling us that the person is actually speaking to the solicitor in this scenario. So the solicitor will most likely be explaining what the person should expect at the police station. So not just researching terminology on sexual assault, but also but also police station procedure. So what would happen when you're interviewed? So things, for example, you'll be cautioned, you'll be given access to a solicitor. They will ask you if you want to speak to a solicitor, and so on and so forth. That kind of thing. Yeah. Um, so and that in itself has got its specific terminology. So I would research that quite carefully. Once again, I do have in my law role play book. We do have some scenarios, namely the first two scenarios actually, which are set at police station, and they cover that kind of procedure and that kind of terminology that comes up during police station interviews. The Once again, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because obviously this is a unified law option. So it'll be interesting to see how they actually manage that, because police station procedures are different in England and in Scotland. So not significantly, but they are different, and the terminology that comes up is different. and the laws that apply are different. So one of the things that you do quite often get in DPSI exams are names of laws and acts of parliament. Now, being a unified law option, that shouldn't happen unless it's a law that applies to the whole of the UK, because that's basically what the institute have said. It will be non-specific. So how they whether that's put into practice or not, we'll have to see. Now, what happens if something comes up in the exam that, in your view, shouldn't really be there? Because you're in Northern Ireland and they're talking about something that's English law and it should be a non-specific legal option, for example, or other things. I will do a separate video on that. Okay, to make sure that you can ensure that the exam is as fair as possible to you as much as possible, I suppose. But yeah, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. I'll do a separate video on that. So basically, the takeaway here is, don't just look up sexual offences. Look up police station procedure, because it sounds like that will be a significant part of what they will be talking about. Okay, um, being cautioned, being charged, potentially being detained, being reported for the crime, maybe or not. They might even, I would have thought they could even go on to talk about, what could happen afterwards, the case being taken to court. But that would be very difficult to talk about in a non-specific way, because obviously the way it works in England and Scotland are quite different. So and Northern Ireland. So I don't imagine they will talk about that, because that would, or if they do, they'll be in kind of very general terms. Okay. Second scenario: a person has attended a family law advice center as their ex-partner is not allowing them to see their child. They wish to obtain advice relating to a contact order. Great. Contact orders. So once again, contact order. That's the main kind of legal point here. So once again, obviously, you read up on that, and don't just read up on contact orders. Read on. My recommendation would be to read up on the more kind of general topic. So things like child arrangements orders, residence orders. Other types of orders that can be passed in relation to children. Other kind of terminology. Once again, in a kind of non-specific way, because once again, the procedure in Scotland and in England is slightly different, and the laws that apply are slightly different, but it's similar enough. That's the topic should work. I'm quite curious how how they've written these topics in a non-specific way, but we'll talk about that later. Great. So I think that one is fairly straightforward, but don't let yourself be lulled into a false sense of security. Sometimes the easier topics tend to be the more challenging ones, also because people tend to spend less time preparing for them. So make sure you do spend enough time preparing for them. Okay, if you're sitting the exam on the Thursday, a client has contacted their solicitor to obtain advice. He thinks that the police are going to speak to him about a road traffic offence. His partner has said that she's happy to take the penalty points, and he might say that she was driving. The solicitor is advising him regarding attempting to pervert the course of justice. Sorry, there's just the personal pronouns there. We're getting me confused, but yeah, it does make sense. So first thing, road traffic offense. We don't know which road traffic offense, so you should look into that. Speeding, driving through red lights, parking on a pedestrian crossing. I don't know. So not only road traffic offences, but road traffic terminology in general. And obviously, this is mostly important for people that don't drive. Some of the terminology in the UK, it can be quite specific, and they've got things that I'm from Portugal, for example. There's some things in the UK that are quite different from my country. Some close enough, but there are some differences terminologically. For example, different types of traffic lights and so on that we might not have, back in Portugal. So I would look into all of that to make sure that you're not caught out. Obviously, how the penalty point system works. in the UK as well, which is quite specific. So I would look at terminology regarding that and totting up points, that kind of thing. Being disqualified, what happens when you accrue 12 points and all that kind of thing. Or different types of disqualifications and so on. So I would definitely look at that, obviously, because that might be relevant. And then, the main one, which is attempting to pervert the course of justice. Not the main one, but the one that you'd kind of most people would view as the main one. So look at all these things, even before you look at attempting to pervert the course of justice. Okay. Now, once again, this is close enough between Scotland and England. In Scotland, there's also a similar crime called attempting to defeat the ends of justice. Close enough. And in this case, I think it is correct. It would be attempting to pervert the course of justice. So I don't have any particular concerns about this topic. I think this one could work quite well. And with proper preparation, hopefully you should be okay. Obviously, if they go on to talk about prosecution and so on and types of courts, that could be, that would have to be country specific. So I don't imagine they will go too much into that, at least in any detail. They might talk about sentences, or you could potentially get life imprisonment or whatever, or very steep fine, that kind of thing, but in a very non-specific manner. So no concerns about that, I would say. So personally, I'm quite happy with that topic. I think you should be too. At first impressions, obviously, we never know. Second scenario, remember the second scenario is the simultaneous interpreting one. A person is at a police station having been accused of drink driving. The accused explains that they believe they have a reasonable excuse for not providing a specimen. The police officer then responds, advising of the procedure which will be adopted. I was quite happy when I saw this topic for our students. I teach a DPSI course, and one of the things we look at is, obviously, we spend a lot of time looking at police station procedure and some of the forms you get when you go to police stations. And one of the forms we look at is the drink driving form, or one of the drink driving forms. Basically, so when you're accused of drink driving, you're taken back to a police station, and you are then required to provide a sample of breath through a machine called an intoximeter. Which is basically a big machine with a tube. You blow through it, and then it tells you how much mouth alcohol you have, and so on. And they always read out certain sections in this form explaining how the machine works. Okay, so this is the kind of thing I think that might come up. That would be quite interesting if basically they use that as the basis for these. So obviously we've got those forms, so it's that's the kind of thing we're gonna use in our preparation for these. Um, I would look at potential the potential consequences of drink driving, things like disqualification, fine, having to go to court once again. Um, um, what's the topic talks about reasonable excuses. So what would the reasonable excuses be for not providing a specimen? For example, you might have COPD, so you can't breathe for long enough to provide a specimen. Okay. Or I don't know, whatever reason might be. This is one that's a little bit vague, but yeah, because we don't know what the accused's excuse is. The police officer then responds, advising of the procedure will be adopted. And yeah, this is the bit where I think or actually, thinking about it now, one of the things that can happen if you fail to provide, or if you're unable to provide a sample of breath, is that there's alternatives. You can provide a urine sample or a blood sample. So actually, once again, this is just my first impressions video, so I'm just kind of thinking as I go along. I have read the topics before, but the ideas are still forming in my head about what could come up. But looking at it now in detail, actually, they could talk about that. Persons at a police station are being accused of, yeah, because he's at the police station. The person then says that they've got reasonable excuse. Okay, well, yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, so basically, actually, thinking about it, so they could be explaining to the guy that he's going to have to provide a urine sample, or that he's going to have to provide a blood sample, and if it's a blood sample, it has to be taken by the police physician, and they'll the police doctor, and they'll have to wait for him to arrive, and blah blah blah, blah. So actually that could be quite straightforward. So that could be okay, especially because it's simultaneous. actually. So it's not going to be that long. So yeah, you might want to look at that. You might want to look at the legal limit of alcohol in the bloods that you can have, both in England and Scotland, in case it comes up. Things like numbers are things that people are things that people make mistakes with in the exam, and are things that almost always come up in the exam. There's almost always some sort of numbers there, and they're there specifically to throw you off, because they know that you focused, and just the way the human brain works, you focused on converting things from one language to another, and you're thinking about the linguistic issues. You're not thinking about numbers because they're just numbers. So yeah, so you might want to look at that, make sure you're familiar with those figures, so if they do come up, hopefully you won't hear them incorrectly, and make a mistake there, which would be unfortunate. And unfortunately, it's a very, very common mistake actually that people do during the exam, and it's also a very easy one to avoid. So yeah, once again, I do have plug my books. Uh, Two books on preparation for the DPSI in law. Scottish law, but it's also useful for people doing English law, I must say, especially when looking at the police station procedure one. So this is the role play one. This is the exercises one. You can find them on, I'll put the link once again below. You can buy them on Amazon. I've got some copies. You can get off me if you want to get them a little bit cheaper. Um, and yeah, the role play one, the first couple of role plays. Let me see if I can show you a preview. Um, Very quickly, you can actually have a quick view of the topics. So these two topics, so it's in the context of a murder rather than a sexual assault, but they're basically police station interviews, and they've got one on drink driving as well, which could be useful. But uh, yeah, it doesn't actually, the preview doesn't actually show you the role play. But yeah, basically they cover that important topic, uh, of police station procedure, and the kind of specific language that they tend to use. The Scottish law exercises got some really useful exercises as well. To cover drink driving somewhere, and descriptions of crimes, which would be useful as well. Legal idioms. Once again, police station procedure, offences, police introduction, all of these would be useful. They're also, yeah, they're also quite useful. I'd say quite useful books to building up your terminology, your glossaries for the written units. Because obviously for the written units and for the site translations, you don't know what's going to come up. Any topics could come up for those. So anyway, that's my plug finished for my books. So I hope so. Yeah, in some, I think the topics for this year are okay. Sometimes they give us quite vague topics, and they're very difficult to prepare, or very obscure topics. I think the topics this year are fairly relevant to the kind of work we do as public service interpreters, so I'm quite happy with them. Depending on obviously what actually comes up in the role plays and how they're actually delivered, I think that we could have quite a good examination this year, and quite fair for the candidates, I hope. Um, I and yeah, I hope this was useful for you. I hope you've got some ideas on the kind of things that you should be looking at. Um, if you've got any comments, if you've got any questions, please feel free to comment below. I'll do my best to answer as quick as I can. And yeah, remember to look at past papers, which are an important part of your preparation. And finally, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me if you do so. And yeah, good luck with your examination. And I will post another video, like I said, on things on basically what you should do if something goes wrong in your examination, which I think is quite an important topic to discuss, but it's a separate topic. Okay, so have a good day, and I'll see you later.